Hello everyone, this is Pete Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we have another video for you, and this will be an overall review of Batwoman Season 2. Now there will be full-on spoilers within this review, so just to let you know, and you can catch up with my previous commentary on Batwoman within the channel, including the season finale of Season 2, and I will leave all the links within the channel, so if you don't want to be spoiled yet, I advise you to go away and catch up with all the episodes throughout Season 2, and then come back to this overall review. Now concerning Batwoman overall as a series, we all know the narrative going ahead into Season 2. Original lead actress Ruby Rose left at the end of Season 1, not liking the working schedule, and the CW decided to go ahead with a new lead character in Ryan Wilder, played by Safiyah Leslie. Ryan Wilder was a black lesbian character who was a martial arts trainer. The CW drew the distinction of this being the first LGBTQ lead character within the CW show. Now Ryan Wilder would don the suit as the new Batwoman, replacing Kate Kane. Now going over the second season and its overall themes, we initially followed Ryan Wilder's journey to becoming Batwoman, learning that she had taught martial arts, of course, and we learn that her mother, or her adopted mother, was killed earlier on within her life, and she's currently serving probation for being in possession of drugs. Over the course of the early episodes, we see how she comes to encounter with the overall Batsuit, and later on how she draws very strong connections with both Mary and Luke, and initially take on the role as the crime fighter and protector of Gotham City. Now the other very dominant theme throughout the season was the search for original lead character Kate Kane, who we thought had died in a plane crash. As showed in the first couple of episodes, we learn throughout the season that Kate does indeed survive the plane crash, and the main characters spend the majority of the season searching her out. Alice was also a prominent character throughout the season, initially wanting to gain revenge on Kate from the fallout of Season 1, but later on we get much more of a backstory of Alice. We learn what happened to her before she arrived in Gotham City, adopting the villainous role with the Wonderland Gang. We learn that she was trained on an island by a very villainous character known as Safiyah. And we saw how over the last 5 years on the island of Coriana, how Alice learned her fighting skills and how she became to be known as a criminal boss within Gotham City. And Safiyah herself, of course, was referenced throughout the latter stages of Season 1. We saw that Mary continued to clash with Jacob over the use of her medical centre. Jacob himself wanted to build bridges with Mary following the fallout of Season 1, but he constantly disapproved of the fact that Mary was a unqualified medical practitioner, completely justified in my opinion. Jacob himself throughout the season struggled with the endless search of Kate Kane, and we saw throughout the latter half of this season him succumbing to the substance known as snakebite. This leads to the overall discovery of corruption within the Crow's security firm and results in the ultimate dissolving of the security firm. Alongside Safiyah, the main second antagonist of the season was initially introduced as Falseface, who turns out later on to be one of the famous Batman villains known as Black Mask, and we see throughout the season how Black Mask cemented his criminal empire and overall influence within Gotham City. Throughout the emergence of Black Mask, we learn the revelation that Kate Kane is still alive, and she would eventually be played by new actress WALLIS. Black Mask heals Kate from her facial wounds suffered during the plane crash, instilling her with the face and memories of his deceased daughter Cersei. And throughout the latter stages of the season, which is probably the strongest segment of the overall season, we see the duality in the identity between Kate Kane and Cersei, and how her duplicitous roles affected both the heroes and the villains throughout the latter stages of the story. We see later on that Luke goes through a turbulent time as he gets shot in the Crow's car park 2/3 of the way through the season. We see him go on a journey of self-discovery as he has a certain dream sequence where he sees visions of Bruce Wayne and he reflects on his life with his father, and has recently released online with the ongoing Batwing costume. We get hints and suggestions that Luke will indeed take on the mantle of Batwing, as we know from the comics, using and utilising the Bat costume throughout Season 3. In terms of Sophie, we see her struggling to get to grips with the emerging corruption within the Crows, and she has to make certain decisions as to whether the Crows are really doing the right thing and making an honourable service within Gotham City. We see her clash multiple times with Ryan Wilder over issues of the police force and whether they treat certain demographics in the right way, or are they much more of a cause of the problem within the society issues within Gotham City. Now overall, in terms of season 2 and how we give much more of a criticism of the show, when I talked about season 1 and gave my overall review, I said one thing it had to improve on in the next season was the lack of creativity and imagination. It had to introduce far more original and interesting antagonists, not just use Batman's villains, which we see so often within other Batman shows, but it had to focus very much on making Batwoman a very distinguishable and imposing crime fighter, and make far more improvements within the storytelling. Now sadly, season 2 failed on all of those fronts, and perhaps overall I think it actually might be a worse season than the first season overall. Now on the positive side, Javicia Leslie is a far more livelier, energetic protagonist than what Ruby Rose was. She has a lot more spark, feistiness and personality about her. She looks far more physically capable, and overall, despite some doubts initially when we saw her first pictures in the suit, she actually looks very convincing overall in the Batwoman makeup. In the first quarter of the show, she remains a very engaging and rootable character, and she forged overall a very good chemistry with both Luke and Mary. The show's story itself did become more interesting in the last quarter when we were dealing with the fallout of the corruption of the Crows, and also the duality identity of Kate and Cersei. And I have to say, despite coming in the show late in the game, WALLIS Day actually performed quite well as the role as Kate Kane, and I would dare say she actually did a superior job than to what Ruby Rose did, despite having limited screen time. And it does beg the question again, would it have been far better to actually recast WALLIS Day as Kate Kane in the season 2 from the beginning? Now unfortunately, we have to talk about the many bad issues overall within this second season, and I think the biggest issue overall was really a thematic one. We've gone over the replacement of Kate Kane, and again we can debate as to whether that was the right decision or not. I personally felt they should have recast her, but season 2, having made the choice to go ahead with Ryan Wilder, it really should have been much more of a reboot, much more of a season 1B, where Ryan Wilder was very much so front and centre the lead protagonist. But the season didn't play out like that, and unfortunately this year it really couldn't let go of Kate Kane as a character, and we saw that all the way through from the beginning. In terms of the plane crash and dealing with Kate's overall disappearance, now that made sense at the beginning couple of episodes where you had to explain what happened to Kate Kane, where did she go, and deal with how her disappearance affected the established characters within the show. But the problem is the season maintained that narrative throughout all of the season for all of the characters involved. It really took it to the point where it took away and underlined, I feel, the presence of Ryan Wilder. Constantly we were always wondering about how to find Kate, where was she, what would happen if she couldn't find her. All of the supporting characters involved, who of course had a deep connection with Kate throughout season 1, they still maintain that connection throughout. And again, this supports the decision as to why they should have recast Kate, because by going ahead with a new lead character, you were kind of cutting off ties with all the supporting characters throughout season 1. This is why I've remarked in previous videos why they should have recasted the character for this second season. Now the quest overall in finding Kate really took priority over establishing Ryan Wilder, and it's almost as if the showrunners just couldn't let go of Kate despite Ryan's inclusion, and this was confirmed in the decision to indeed bring back Kate halfway throughout the season. I get the impression that things were very much done on the fly. They initially decided to go with Ryan Wilder and made a conscious decision halfway through. Maybe this was to coincide with the fact that, as well known and pointed out by many people online, the show's ratings have been in steady decline throughout this second season, starting off with around 600,000 to 700,000, and by the end of the season that figure would drop to close to just over 400,000. So maybe during this ratings decline they thought it would be a good idea to bring back Kate from the dead, as to so to speak, in order to try and jumpstart the ratings, but that didn't work out in the long run. The other big issue was the role of Alice, and I've commented many times that Rachel Skarsten's performance was probably the best element throughout season 1. Alice was far more the interesting and most complex character throughout season 1. She initially started off with the overall villain, but they've made a big effort to try and show some elements of sympathy and redemption with the character, but when we came to the end of season 1 and we knew that Ruby Rose was leaving the show, it really for me should have signaled the end of Alice's role, because when you take away her connection with Kate, there's no real reason or justification to keep Alice throughout the show unless you make her an out-and-out villain, and the showrunners didn't want to do that. The showrunners wanted to walk that line between Alice as an overall villain and Alice as an anti-hero, and because of that you have to constantly find and justify reasons for Alice's presence throughout the show if she's not going to be the out-and-out villain. So they doubled down on the involvement of Alice, and many times she seemed to be more involved in the show than what Ryan Wilder did. We got various arcs of Alice throughout the show, with her initially searching for Kate in terms of revenge, then searching for her in order to rescue her and build bridges. We then had a narrative where she wanted to erase her memories of Kate. We had the backstory of Safiyah, as I mentioned before. We then had a romance love story with Ocean, her ongoing conflict with Safiyah, and all of these elements seemed really unimportant in terms of the overall story of Batwoman. And once again, just constantly trying to keep Alice longer in the show than what she should have done. And it took any urgency away from the show in particular, and as I mentioned before, the real focus should have been far more on creating a solid protagonist in Ryan Wilder and establishing her role as Batwoman throughout the overall story. This is even more emphasising the fact that Alice was overly competent throughout the story, the fact that she could break into any place throughout. We had multiple scenes where she was breaking into the Crows, which is meant to be a security firm, but Alice had no problem breaking into the car park and breaking into people's vehicles multiple times. She was constantly infiltrating Wayne Enterprises, again, which should be a majorly secure fortress throughout, but Alice was able to break in anytime she wanted to, whether it be other underground layers, Sophia's Island, hospitals. This was really stretching credibility and plausibility throughout, and this is the showrunners again wanting to make sure that Alice was at the forefront, and it really took away from much of the credibility of the overall season. They took this even further in all of a sudden making Alice a skilled, competent. You know, we had justification for Ryan Wilder because of her martial arts background, and really any encounter between Batwoman and Alice should have been a completely one-sided affair. They introduced the revenge element because we discovered that Alice was the one who indeed killed Ryan's adopted mother when they were living in the squat location, so that was up in the ante. And when we get the eventual confrontation, Ryan Wilder really should have dominated and overtaken and perhaps even killed or apprehended Alice, but multiple times they were coming up with all of these unconvincing reasons when Alice was able to match Ryan Wilder in an even fight. There were multiple scenarios where Alice was able to get away at the last minute. We then took it even further and we had multiple scenes when Alice and Ryan were actually teaming up together. So despite the fact that Ryan had discovered that Alice was the killer of her mother, she was still teaming up with her to find out certain villains and locations, and it really just felt out of place when they were bantering and even having little jokes and conversations in the Batmobile or walking together in the street. It just really didn't ring true, and then once again I felt underlined the true presence and credibility of Ryan Wilder as a character. We look at both villains throughout the season and I think they were very weak, both in Safiyah and Black Mask. Safiyah herself could have been a very interesting and dominant antagonist throughout the show, but she was overall a very flat character, lacking any real imposing presence or personality. The actress herself wasn't really anything special to rate about in terms of her overall performance, and overall Safiyah just really wasn't very interesting of a character. We look at Black Mask himself, as I mentioned before, one of the very famous villains of Batman within his own universe, but this Black Mask here was very hokey, a very jokey presence, very flat, again lacking any real menace or threat overall. And it begs the question again for me why the series overall should really try and look into more original villains. I'm pretty sure the Batwoman comic series, if they delve deep into enough, they'll find separate original villains that they can take, rather than taking on Batman's villains and giving us really a really low discount bargain basement version of those interpretations of the characters. We look at overall the Cersei and Kate narrative, and it was never convincing the fact that you could instill memories of another person into another personality. Never really worked for me. We could talk all day long about the logistics of putting a face on another character, but of course WALLIS Day is far more taller and physically imposing than Kate Kane, so wouldn't anybody notice the different physical dimensions, the fact that Kate is a lot taller than what she originally was? In terms of her voice as well, just because you put a face mask on somebody, it doesn't change their overall voice, right? So all of these distinctive things really ruined the credibility of the show. And whilst some people may have found very interesting painting Kate as the overall villain in many aspects with the Cersei identity, for me, I just think it just fell flat overall. Why bring Kate back if you're going to introduce to her as the villain? I think overall, when we look at the finale of this season, how it played out, I think it might have been best to have Kate and Alice walk off into the sunset together along with Jacob, and that would have done very good in terms of clearing the decks overall and making sure then that Ryan Wilder could be more established as the antagonist going ahead for season 3. When we also look at Ryan Wilder as an antagonist, as I mentioned before, she started off a very rootable character, but halfway through the season she got a bit overall complacent. There are multiple scenes when she's constantly having a go at Mary and Luke, even though they're trying to do the right thing, and Ryan Wilder became at times very headstrong and very reckless, and it got into trouble in certain scenarios. We do then of course have to talk about the social commentary, particularly halfway through the point, and we had multiple episodes where Ryan was commenting on the fact that she was black, commenting on the fact that she was lesbian as well. We had this back and forth between her and Sophie throughout the season when they were clashing, and we had this whole narrative of defund the police as well, and Ryan will talk about the fact that she was a certain number on a social calendar within the social city, and again it just felt a bit forced, and I think just took away a lot of Ryan Wilder and the initial positive feeling that we saw throughout her character in the first stage of the season. We all know how much the woke marketing affected season 1, so you'd like to think they would have wanted to get away from the whole social justice commentary, but they kind of doubled down on it and really took away from the story and underlined the credibility of the show and the fact that this really should be a crime fighting superhero show, not a social commentary show as well. So that did get annoying throughout some parts of the overall second season. All of the problems with season 1 in terms of the lacklustre action and choreography and fight sequences that were darkly lit, making it difficult to see who was fighting who, they all remained there overall, along again with the storytelling issues and the real waste of certain antagonists that I feel should be made a lot more of a bigger effort in order to make this a far more distinctive show than what we see in Batman as well. So really no more improvements in terms of the overall weaknesses as what we saw in the first season, and coupled with the fact that I think Alice maybe perhaps overstayed her welcome. I think Ryan Wilder became a bit unlikable throughout the second season, and also the fact that had very weak antagonists in both Safiyah and Black Mask as well. So when I look at all of those elements, I sadly have to say that season 2 was an even weaker season than season 1, if that's even possible. So when I give an overall score of Batwoman season 2, I gave the first season I think a 4.0 out of 10, or hovering around those lines. So sadly I have to give Batwoman season 2 a 3.8 out of 10. Like I said, very disappointing despite an improvement in the protagonist of Ryan Wilder. Just very disappointing in terms of its lackluster action, villains, storytelling, action and choreography overall, and coupled with the fact that we have a decline in ratings, you really do question as to whether the show warranted an actual season 3 overall. But despite saying that, we are going to get a season 3, and if you go ahead now with the fallout of the season 2 finale, it looks like we are going to get an inclusion of more iconic Batman villains, including the likes of Penguin and Poison Ivy. I'm pretty sure we will see more included. Black Mask, I'm sure, will be a returning presence, and I'm pretty sure Alice will break out of her imprisonment and come forward and be a presence again. So I'm pretty sure we're going to get much more of a wilder, very outlandish season 3 with a whole collation of Batman's most iconic villains. Maybe they will really swing for the fences. I personally feel that season 3 will be its last, but we'll wait and see. If we do see an improvement in the ratings, they may go ahead and continue for season 4. Will Batwoman continue to cross over with the other episodes or the other shows within the Arrowverse, the likes of The Flash, Superman and Lois, and the returning Supergirl as well? We will wait and see. We do know there's a crossover a 5-episode crossover, but that will only primarily take place on The Flash, I believe, as well. So we really are in a state of doubt in terms of the overall future of Batwoman and whether it can survive a season 3. I don't like to be negative on these overall reviews, but it will be a huge jump in quality if we do indeed see an improvement of season 3. But now that we've cleared the decks and we've seemingly got rid of Kate Kane now, and it was confirmed recently that Dougray Scott, who played Jacob, won't be coming back for a season 3, so hopefully now season 3 can establish much more on Ryan Wilder as the prime and protagonist of the show, and we could get a far more improvement in terms of the overall quality of villains and antagonists throughout season 3 overall. So those are my thoughts and feelings, an in-depth review of Batwoman season 2. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think this year was an improvement or a decline in the show overall? How well do you feel Ryan Wilder can cross over with the likes of The Flash, Stargirl and Superman and Lois if we indeed do get those crossovers? Do you think the show can survive overall season 3, or do you think season 3 should be its last and maybe we can see an investment into another character within the DC universe? So that's my review. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please also hit and like those subscription and like and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content and reviews like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay at safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.